Welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Devang and Simon. I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bushell. Bush, we're back in the tennis driver's seat. The Olympics are finally in the rearview mirror, but isn't it fitting that the biggest story in tennis is doping related? Isn't this just a callback to your obsession with the Olympics?
Oh, I didn't expect this as an intro, but it does make sense, doesn't it? For an Olympic Games that was so free of big doping scandals-ish, we have to come full circle and have the world number one, for goodness sake. Dev, this is a terrible story all around. Everyone comes out of it looking awful. And if you were to circle the one situation I think the ATP did not want to see, it would be this. And yet they still managed to mess this up in some ways.
Seismic news. The US Open obviously beginning. Probably the news that tennis as a whole collectively did not want to have as the lead story heading into this was that the world number one of the new faces of tennis, one of the faces that's going to bring tennis out of the big three Serena era into new heights, new territory, Jannik Sinner, was found to have failed 2 doping tests within 8 days. Those doping tests occurred on weeks that a tournament did not fall. Otherwise, we probably would have heard about these if they occurred ahead of, let's say, Madrid or something else like that, Bush. But the big seismic news is that Jannik Sinner has been cleared for these violations. I don't know if you want to start there and go into maybe the TikTok of how we started and where we are now.
Well, I copied in the BBC article because I think just to give groundwork to set the scene perhaps for everyone. So maybe I'll read this out and then we can circle back to it in a second. It also gives me my long favored opportunity to become a BBC newscaster. So stay with me for a second. Will you allow me?
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
I know, this is a dream.
A dream for me. World number one Jannik Sinner has been cleared of any wrongdoing after twice testing positive for a banned substance in March. The Italian tested positive for low levels of metabolite of colostable. See, this is why I'll never be a BBC News reader, because I can't read this stuff. A steroid that can be used to build muscle mass during the Indian Wells. A further sample taken 8 days later also tested positive for low levels of the same metabolite. A provisional suspension was applied automatically, but as Sinner challenged it successfully, he was able to keep playing. The International Tennis Integrity Agency found Sinner was inadvertently contaminated with this substance by Giacomo Naldi, his physiotherapist. Naldi has been applying an over-the-counter spray available in Italy to a cut on his own hand after he'd carried out treatment on Sinner. The ITIA accepted the explanation and the violation was not intentional. Sinner was cleared of fault or negligence by the independent tribunal last week, but he will lose all the ranking points and prize money from the semi-final run at Indian Wells. So that's the sort of nature of the story. There is a billion different ways, I think, to tackle this one. What sticks out to you as the top line, perhaps, or what is the thing that caught your eye? Because this is a story that has been covered in numerous different ways, and I'm sure will be covered by numerous different outlets over the next week or so, especially heading into the US Open, as you mentioned. But just from a personal, as a fan perspective, what is the one thing that you saw during the course of the week of this story that made you raise your eyebrows?
I'd say the reaction from players probably is the biggest takeaway for me. You have like your Nick Kyrgios and your Shapos coming out pretty forcibly talking about this, but also just in general, like the rank and file posting, subtweeting, doing what they're doing, kind of like reflects how Jannik Sinner's perceived, which we didn't really know until now, which is interesting. Like maybe he's not the super beloved guy that we assumed he was on tour. The other thing is the different rules for different people. This is clearly a case where this looks bad, right? And like the timing looks awful, but you also get like the TikTok of like how they managed to get this delayed and not put out into the press, and like how Jannik Sinner's team was so like on it and like literally they did everything right to a T to get this to the point where this was the least bad outcome, I guess, if you could say it, in their camp being like the first time anybody heard about this was when he was cleared, which is not normally how this works. It's usually the opposite. Right. So like the fact that it didn't work that way, the fact that we didn't hear about the positive test and then everything else after, is like 99% of how things do not happen in this case. Like it's never like this. So I think that's interesting to me, full stop, those first two things, the reaction from the players and how this is backwards to like every other doping scandal that we usually see.
Do you think Jannik Sinner, do you think it is aimed at Sinner himself, the personality, or do you think it's what he is symbolic of, perhaps an elitism within the sport and that disparity that exists between higher ranking and lower ranking players? Because by the very, whatever you think about the system and whatever you think about how this has gone down, I think it has largely worked exactly as it was intended to. Now you can, I can find fault with many things about the system here of how it worked, but him and his legal team and his counsel basically played a blinder here, other than being caught and other than all the other things that come with it. But
that legal team, man, that's Wimbledon 2008 for that legal team. They put out a hell of a performance. My God. But it's just saying the things we always knew about the sport out loud, right? Like there are different rules for different people. There always have been. It comes down to scheduling when they play. It comes down to the assignments they get for practice courts. It comes down to the lodgings they get, what they can afford, how many people come with them to things, because they can afford to travel with a posse of 10 to 20 people. Like there is a different class of people on the tours. And I think the reaction to this is a bit of, exactly what you're saying, Bush. Like people like, you see, you get this, like Michael and the other people who have missed drug tests, and like that's been another talking point, like your Jensen Brooksbys or your Michael Eamers, like the people who have lost a lot of time because they weren't afforded these same proceedings. They didn't, I guess you could also say, like they didn't do these same things that Sinner's camp did, correct? Like there are different things that are in place here, but like optically it looks so terrible that I would have loved to have known what the plan was when this was happening in real time. Because if you recall, like the full court press during this time was about Jannik becoming number one, and like Andre Agassi putting out a video, and like all these stars and people commenting on like the new kid on the scene, and here's the other guy with Carlos that's gonna save the day. Like that was all we were talking about, and it's because of what they were saying, and that they being the tennis tour in the majors. So what a calculated risk / gamble / like, okay, we're completely cool with the explanation. It does seem to check out. This physio guy has been implicated with this sort of exact scenario several times. The steroid itself comes with like a huge, like, do not buy kind of symbol on the cover of it. Don't buy the steroid cream as an option as well. I think Luke mentioned that on the Discord. Like there's so many things here that I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I like Jannik Sinner. I like watching him play. There's also part of me that's like, you seem to figure out all the things that you kind of need to figure out to win the big titles, aka lasting physically, because I've noticed he can't do that all the time. So I hate that it's now brought up all these questions for me, because I won't be able to get them out of my head watching him play. Probably ever, right? And that's where we are. I know once this happened, what do you think the first thing they thought, Bush? Like the ATP, Godenzi and crew?
That is a legitimately good question, because there is a school of thought here, and there's an approach to this that says that, given the situation of him having the provisional mandatory suspension, that he was entitled to do what he, in a sense, it works as a gagging order for all intents and purposes. You can take issue with my phrasing on that, but the fact that the way his legal team and that was structured is that it enabled this period of silence to occur while he went through the appeals process. With all that being said, everyone in the ATP probably knew about this as well. Like, I don't think you get into a situation where the top echelons of your game are not familiar with these situations, and how they chose to react to it and continue to push that guy. We will never know the insides of how much of that organization is connected together and whether or not they are kept entirely separate from each other. But I think you have to be fairly naive if you don't believe that the top members of the sport knew about this and were continuing to push it in a certain way. That doesn't sit too well with me.
I mean, the explanation itself, a part of me feels like a rube, like a moron for believing it fully. He was applying the cream to the trainer's hand himself because he had a cut, and then he used it to apply different cream probably to Jannik, right?
I think there's a saying, isn't there? And forgive me, I don't know the exact phraseology of it, and it has many different versions of it, but it's the don't chalk up malice to what is usually incompetence, or words to that effect. And I think you've seen a lot of people reaching for that argument with this story, which is that we're all humans, we all make mistakes, all this kind of stuff to sort of put it in that camp. But that sort of has an element of parasocial giving the benefit of the doubt here. And I think there's a difference to the way that phrase is applied, because sometimes it gets applied to your workplace or like that kind of situation. This is professional sport. These people know what they're doing. They are trying to get edges constantly. So I don't think it quite aligns to me, the idea that this was someone who was just doing it for, who was someone who was, just a bit dim and it sort of ended up this way. It looks far more deliberate to me anyway. There was so much chat during the course in our Discord during the course of the week that I think we tended to forget or didn't circle around at the fact that this dude looks pretty damn guilty. It really does look that way to me. Personal opinion, but at the same time, Dev, it looks pretty awful for Jannik Sinner.
Some shades of Halep, yeah. There's some shades of Halep here, right? Mm-hmm. Which everyone seemed or felt pretty confident about in terms of guilt or not, which, I mean, she's playing now. So, I hate being like so cynical all the time, but I really am like trying to strain, like, oh, okay, like maybe this happened, maybe that happened, or maybe like the other part of me is like is considering past cases of this happening. It's thinking about like how the PTPA will handle this. Also, the Jack Draper, Felix Auger-Aliassime drama that happened a few days before this, and like the rallying cry that was mainly like, why don't we have replay in tennis? This should be fixed. And like Novak everyone talking about it, everyone agreeing. Everyone also agreeing Felix is a great dude. But like going from that immediately, which is like mass consensus, we got to get this involved, that umpire doesn't know what he's doing, to this, where now it's like, oh God, like the very like when you think about it, like the actual integrity of the whole dang sport is sort of on the line when we're here, because a lot of the other talk I've heard is like, well, the Australian Open, or like, how was he clean then? Or like, we do know that he was tested a lot. I saw Andy Roddick talk about this on his podcast in terms of like Grand Slam testing. So we know that he was probably tested around there and passed the check. So like, it doesn't have to feel like the sky is falling when it's like, is everyone crooked? But also, it would be naive AF not to assume that this is happening. So I guess it depends how far you want to dig into it. Because like the fact that this didn't make bigger news beyond tennis was very surprising to me, especially considering when this happened. Like, this was the perfect dead period, I thought, for this to really bust out. So maybe in the end, this was a fantastic PR job / like, this is when we should put this out for Sinner and co.
Yeah.
Because I truly think about this. This is the world number. This is the top player in the world at the sport. And it was like, okay, cool. He's playing in New York, so like, well, we'll talk to him about it. But like, yeah, he's good to go.
So there's that side of it. Like, clearly from a perspective of looking at it, and as a whole, and the timing of this, and how Sinner was able to control the narrative and all that kind of stuff, there is a counter argument to this, that this was all done, by the book in due course, right? Like he was under
Innocent till proven guilty. They couldn't prove he was guilty, even though it was a Looney Tunes ass explanation as to how this happened. So
yeah, and the way
worked.
The point system and structure works is that it came out deliberately on this day due to count back and them having to be on that 4-month schedule. Like that is all. That is not conspiracy theory. I think that is how the system is set up. Now, if you want to ask the question about whether the system is fucked, I think that is a very reasonable question to ask, and whether or not you believe you have legitimacy in that system, and whether or not a player or a group or the people around the player are so well versed at being able to get around this system and are gaming it. I think that is also a legitimate question as well. And as it says in Icarus, like to go back to that great documentary about it, players and athletes don't dope during competitions. They dope before it. That's the whole point, is that you're supposed to take advantage of it so you don't get caught during the time that you're actually doing it. So I think from that perspective, it seems it's not surprising to me that someone doesn't get caught in competition. It's just, the situation where if you're doing something outside of it and you get caught then it seems a bit more likely to me, honestly.
It's up to you what you want to believe here. I can't, me personally though, and I think I'm with you, Bush. Like I can't exit this saga without a real bad taste in my mouth. Like
There is a wonderful and charming and very funny phrase from Blackadder, and stay with me here for my British listeners. It's, he looks as guilty as a puppy sitting next to a pile of poo. And I think that's how I feel about this. It looks so bad. Yes, as I said, his team played a blinder to get this kick down the road and everything. But all the things you expect me to believe all this? Come on, dude. Like, come on. We're not 12 here.
You missed the Olympics because of tonsillitis too. Oh my God, there's some pretty stringent doping checks there, aren't there?
Feels a bit.
Just thinking out loud.
Just a bit dodgy. This does.
Oh man, what a disaster! Like again, though, I wonder. I really will this. Maybe we're in a silo or bubbled off. But are you not surprised this wasn't bigger news elsewhere?
I think it made pretty big news, though. I don't think it quite had the impact that you would expect, and I think that's what you're kind of alluding to.
If he was suspended, sure.
I think that's the PR play here, isn't it? It's to create doubt. This is why you go through this, and this is why you do it as a legal team, and why you do it as a camp around you.
And to me, there's like this idea of slow playing it or not doing anything is sort of how they've approached Zverev, and like sort of been like, well, we'll see, or like, yeah, like let's see what happens, and then to see if they get kind of lucky, or see if the court of public opinion is like, well, F it, like I don't know. So
I think a lot of people will point a finger and say, like, independent panel cleared him, all this kind of stuff. He went through the process he gave, he had evidence. And I would point and push back at that and say, most of the time, these athletes and the people around them are a lot smarter than the people that are testing them. And they know how to do this. And they are very, very skillful at being able to navigate these situations. And we know people dope in our sport. It happens. It's happened throughout history. It will happen through every competitive situation. It happens all the time. It just so happens that sometimes the world number one gets caught, and it sucks when that happens, in my opinion.
What do you make of coaching staffs, the teams? Darren Cahill was quoted after this. He is, of course, the coach of Jannik Sinner. He was the coach of Simona Halep. He was not her coach when she was punished. Patrick Wartoglu was. But quote from Darren Cahill, he would never do anything intentionally. He was in an unfortunate situation. The truth is out, no fault or negligence, and hopefully he can put this behind him. And then he cites the reason why the overturning worked. The reason why it was possible for him to continue playing after the short provisional suspension is that they were able to locate precisely where the incident occurred. And they were able to explain what happened with the spray, where to like by the hour. So yeah, this is massive for Darren Cahill as well, like the guilt by association stuff and the sort of links. I'm fascinated to see how this is talked about during the US Open, because holy hell, like it'll either not be talked about by most, or B, it'll be talked about in the most cringy, ham-fisted way possible, which will be good viewing. But how much do you think it will be covered?
Considering Darren Cahill's on the payroll of ESPN as well, like it's going to be fascinating to watch that. I would be surprised if they actually touch this one a whole lot. It seems like this is not something they really want to get involved with. Any major incidents that have occurred in our sport over the last few years, I think ESPN don't want to touch this at all. So I'd be shocked and surprised if they actually did find a way to cover this. On the Cahill thing, just to sort of circle back on it for a second, he actually, I think everyone is going to be quick to flog him over this, just given A. Verdasco, B. Halep, and C. Sinner.
Yeah.
The timelines don't quite line up for those things. I think it's more, shitty timing and each individual case to be looked at individually of why these players have been caught for various different reasons. Having said all that, these people seem really fucking dumb. Why does this continue to happen around you? Like, it seems that something is very unprofessional, at least in this scenario.
Those edges, man. You said it very well. The edges are so small and so fine. Mm-hmm. The real story behind them probably makes a lot of sense, because like the actual explanation is like, what the hell? How could you let this happen? How could you let this guy who's been implicated several times in other sports for the exact same thing make a dumbass mistake like this that would implicate the golden boy, one of the golden men?
This is your athlete. Like, for fuck's sake.
It's like crazy negligence. It's one of the oh my God. Like it,
this is not.
The timing is so bad. The timing is so bad.
Put it into context. This is not a whoopsie. Oh dear. I actually bought some contaminated beef from the supermarket, and my athletes are having it.
It'd be like if Lance was found out after the first tour, and they're like, nah, it's good, everyone, it's good, and then they let him kept going, and then he's like, oh, okay, so he's really clean. And then
it does have to be said, I guess, in closing this segment, he is going to be watched like a hawk at this point now. So his results, I think, will be indicative of what
the reaction will be. Fascinating. Yeah, who knows? Maybe he goes heel and people love it. Do you think? Wears a backwards hat. I think there's a play here where he takes on the bad boy moniker, or like I honestly think it's the only play.
There is a conversation to be had anytime an athlete gets caught of who is responsible for it. Is the camp pushing it onto the individual? Is it the individual who's pushing for this? Is the individual sort of making a claim of like, oh, I'm struggling to keep up in this situation. I keep falling down in this particular area. I'm struggling over 3 sets. I'm struggling, my forehand's not good enough. Or pick anything, right? Like any of the sport. I'm really struggling in that final 10 meters of the 100 meters. Can we find another way to train on this area? That maybe is what the athlete is saying. We'll never know what that conversation has happened. And anyone who is trying to claim the opposite is living in pure fantasy. That is pure parasocial relationship of saying that that's something that Jannik would never do. You have no idea. You don't know what the inside of that camp looks like. You don't know how that conversation has gone, what has been suggested, and anything about it. But the idea, I think, that everyone involved in it is not aware of what would be happening. I think if an athlete wants to dope, everyone in the camp is aware of it, and I think the athlete themselves is aware of it. I just don't think you can keep it hidden from people when you live that close to each other, and that's the way that your sort of professional life runs.
I think that's a good place to leave segment 1. When we come back, parting shots, including some actual tennis talk, some more Sinner stuff, plus we actually look at the draws for the US Open and make some foolish picks. Coming up next on Open Era. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. Of course, Jannik Sinner, innocent. His amazing legal team, if you're listening to this, totally innocent. And he's playing in New York, baby. But he was also in Cincinnati, where, boy oh boy, were some social media posts having to be deleted after this happened. Because thanks to the Olympics, the final happened on Monday. We had Aryna Sabalenka doing the damn thing in Cincy, which we'll talk about. But we also had Jannik Sinner beating Frances Tiafoe in the final. Do we want to do Sinner first just to clap this out?
Yeah, I think so. And also just to give a huge shout out to Frances Tiafoe, dressed as a tennis ball in this final.
Yeah. Or as Josh said, dresses as if a child drew a tennis ball. Yeah.
I think this was a really fun final. And I don't think Frances Tiafoe wants to be known as a player who makes things entertaining but ultimately loses. But if ever there was a definition of that sort of moniker that gets used on him, it was this final. It was really fun, but ultimately he wasn't really close across the two sets. It was one of those things that there was a vastly superior player who had ice in his veins through the entirety of this match. And it was a demolition job.
It was, like I said, that ice in the veins tweet deleted, but Sinner champion in Cincinnati. Sabalenka, though, Bush, she wins the title, dominated the final, but the win over Swiatek, Simon, in the semifinals, a marker / sign of things to come, ?
Potentially, yeah. She was really full value for it as well, right? It's not one of those that you had an off day or anything. Sabalenka just blew her off the court. It was, talk about a match that wasn't close. That is another example of it. She's unstoppable on her day, like when everything's working and she's hitting with the level of depth and power that she possesses. That's going to feel really, really good because it's been a long time since she's won a title. I think the last title she won was in Australia for the first Grand Slam of the year. So it's been a long time coming. Obviously, some truly harrowing things have happened since that point and continues to sort of deal with the fallout of it all. But at the same time, so much confidence. And I think this might be one of the most fun matchups on tour, regardless men or women. I love watching Sabalenka and Swiatek play, and hopefully we get more of it.
Really hope we get that in New York. Really good article in The Guardian from Ben Bloom, a long interview with Sabalenka, which she goes through the tumultuous, difficult year she's gone through, and speaking about multiple things, including her friendship with Paolo Badosa. Really good read. I recommend it to get more insight into the world number 2, who is one of the favorites at this tournament. But Simon, quickly on Iga, a mark for her longevity at number 1.
Yeah, I wanted to just highlight this because it was something that sort of slipped. I don't know. It's one of those things that reigns as number 1 or length of weeks tends to not get spoken about until you reach stratospheric heights. When you're talking like the Novak Djokovic passing Rafael Nadal and the potential of passing Steffi Graf and all this kind of stuff. But one thing that came out during this course of this week is Iga Swiatek overtook Justine Henin in terms of how long the Belgian was at world number 1. So 117 weeks, tying it. So not overtaking. Will have overtaken it by next week, assuming that nothing insane happens and there's no testing that comes out, etc., etc. I shouldn't say that.
Good God.
There's no implication at all here. Okay, let's move on quickly. But the other side of this is the players that are ranked above Swiatek, who have been world number 1, that being Ash Barty, Monica Seles, Martina Hingis, Chrissy Everett, Serena Williams, Martina Navratilova, and Steffi Graf. It's quite a short list, isn't it, of players that you would have expected to have held that number 1 ranking for extended periods of time. She's in some pretty decent company already, and she's only going to continue to go higher on that list. But you would have thought that more players had been above the 117-week mark.
Yeah, I mean, there's some goats in there, and it kind of goes to show you, like, it's a select crew, but it's quite a small list. And once you make it there, it's quite something. Really excited for the women's draw, and that leads us into our blind US Open draw previews. Simon hasn't seen the draw until right now. I've seen a few matchups, but I haven't seen anything really extensively. So we're going to go into it. Simon, let's look at the women's side. What are you thinking in terms of, I was about to say like sleepers, but to me, there is a full like class of clear favorites in which there are 2, maybe 3. But then afterwards, it's pretty open. Do you consider Coco Gauff one of the favorites? She is the defending champion, but has not been a great year for her so far, especially recently.
Well, I'm literally digesting this live. We figured it would be an interesting feature to do on the podcast. So let's look at this. Before I answer your question, let's ask another question just while I'm looking through this. When you first get a draw, how do you break it down? Like, what are you looking at first of all?
Love to look at the lucky losers first, if there are any, because that's always wonderful. Get that cash, get that check feeling. But look for Canadian flags. That's usually what I used to do in the past, honestly, because there was always so few. And then I was like, whoa. And then you would zoom in and see what was happening. Nowadays, I look for, I don't know, clusters. I look for clusters of flags. Nothing really, there's no method to the madness.
Yeah, I'm obviously like who's winning a section of a draw. That's one thing that I always look at. What's going to be the fourth round matchup usually? Like, what is the sort of gateway to the second week? That's one that I always look at to see. And then it's who's on either side of the draw. So potentially what are the ladder stages what matchups could potentially happen there? And then after that, I sort of circle back and look at first round matchups. So just like sort of looking at and examining this for the first time, I think I'm looking at things here, and that first round matchup of Raducanu versus Kennan looks really, really tasty. Two former champions, two former Grand Slam champions meeting in round one. That's really interesting. Really, really tough section for both of those players to come out of, though, just given how well people in that section are playing, both Danielle and Jess Pegula. It's going to be Danielle Collins' last US Open as well, so looks pretty okay for her on that side of the draw. Yeah. What are the first round matchups stick out to you?
Ostapenko Osaka looks good.
Ostapenko Osaka, okay, yeah, that one's an interesting one.
Yeah, the Andreescu Paolini looks very good. Potapova Fernandez, that's all in the same section 4. So holy cow, that's going to be something. I looking ahead a bit, potentially Iga Swiatek versus Mira Andreeva in the fourth round could be spicy. Andreeva's been very good the last few weeks.
This is a good draw for Sabalenka, this is, from the looks of it.
It is, yeah. I think, Madison Keys' health is in question. Otherwise, I think she could be dangerous for sure. But other than that, you got Zheng maybe in the quarterfinals. But yeah, I like Sabalenka's draw a lot. I like Sabalenka in this tournament, Bush. I think it lines up well. Didn't do the Olympics, came back in Washington, has kind of like slow played her return. Obviously, I think she's found a way to manage with all of the shit that's happened in a positive way, or as much as she can. So I'm gonna take her on the women's side.
I think it's a good pick. I also think that's where I might lean as well. It's a tough draw for Coco Gauff in that section. Some good players in there. Fourth round, second up. That was really tough. She's a gauntlet to get through of players there. Starts relatively okay and then gets pretty horrible pretty quickly after that.
Let's turn our attention to the men's side. I laughed a bit, Simon. Jannik Sinner's the number 1 seed, but all of this stuff I read was that Alcaraz and Novak are on opposite sides of the draw. Obviously, the Olympics loom large in people's minds, but do you think the doping stuff played into how the results of the draw are presented at all?
I was going to say that the factor into the draw itself. Yeah. Are we getting a UEFA hot balls situation as they're drawing them out of the ball machine? I don't know. Probably, undoubtedly, it has to have played somewhat of a factor in terms of who is marketed. Because
I say this, Sinner's the favorite. He should be the favorite here. I especially think Alcaraz is not going to have enough juice after thinking that he'd be cool after the Olympics. The meltdown in Cincinnati shook me. So maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I feel like he's going to need a bit more in the tank mentally to come through over 2 weeks in a tournament like this. So I would back Sinner over him. And Novak is always Novak, but I mean, over 5 sets, let's see. But how can Sinner not be one of the favorites, if not the favorite, especially after Cincinnati, unless you think the crowd going for blood or cheering him at every second might face him?
Well, I think the answer to the question of who is the favorite for the US Open largely depends on your read of how far and how good Danny Medvedev is at the moment, because he is lurking in that section of the draw. It's a tough road for Jannik Sinner to get through to the final. It's not an easy one. I think it ramps up in difficulty quite quickly. Early rounds doesn't look too terrible. I don't know, man. Medvedev is extremely good at this tournament. I think people tend to forget when it comes to this time of year. This is his moment. He's so good here. But yeah, that half of the draw is not very nice when it comes to players that he's going to have to beat. Poor Shapo as well, looking at this section of the draw. Gets Botic on a protected ranking and then gets Alcaraz potentially next. Poor dude.
Oh, God, yeah. That's not going to be fun. God, Medvedev's a great shout. In terms of the bottom half, I actually do like Novak a lot. I think he'll be fine. There's no one here that really... there could be a fun match against Tiafoe maybe in the fourth round, but like overall, I think he'll be okay till the final.
Yeah, potential quarter against Zverev. Semi. Quarter. No, semi-final. His draw looks fine, honestly.
Truly.
If I had to pick that side of the draw, I think I'd still favor him coming out of it. There's no one there that really terrifies me. Rune's not had a good season. He would always stack up well. I'm certainly not picking Casper Ruud to come out of that bottom section. I would pick Nadal to come out. Sorry, pick Nadal. Jesus Christ. I would pick Novak Djokovic to come out of that second half.
I do want to shout out Lorenzo Musetti, it would be fun as well, Bush, if he had a nice run here. But the qualifiers, familiar names, Gabriel Diallo, Canadian, making it through, Kentucky product. That was really exciting. That run through qualifying, which is a gauntlet here, just to make it through those three matches. So that's huge for the Canadian. Also, Diego Schwartzman Bush came through qualifying, which is cool to see. Love of the game is real. The Schwartzman showed it. So that'll be cool. I'm also just generally looking at some of these first rounders, Bush, Zhang, and Jack Draper. I don't think Jack Draper should get off scot-free from Ballgate or whatever the hell happened in Cincinnati. How is he not getting more stick for like not admitting what happened? Everyone knows. Everyone knows, and you feel that unnatural feeling.
Maybe they do know it, and it's just being kept inside of the hallowed grounds of the locker room. The people are giving him the side eye. Much
like the shade being thrown Sinner's way, maybe not directly, and everyone's like, Felix is the greatest. No one's like Jack Draper, good guy after that, right? So
definitely not. Who is your winner, Devang?
Fudge. I want to pick Sinner. I think it'd be really funny. So I think I'm going to pick Sinner for banter reasons. This to me is like a huge brutal incident that I don't understand why it's not a bigger deal. So I feel like Sinner winning will really open our eyes to how farcical this might be.
I don't want to. Yeah, I think Novak Djokovic is going to win this tournament,
and maybe it is perfect. People will be openly cheering for Novak in a final to win in New York, finally, and it's going to happen. 25.
The only reason I say that is just like, I don't see anyone in the bottom half of the draw that I would pick in a matchup against him. And then it's just a straight, like, who do I pick? Djokovic against Sinner, Djokovic against Medvedev, Djokovic against Alcaraz. I think he can lose all of those matchups, but I also think he's going to be fresher going into those than the other guys will be.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it. And I think like over 5 sets, Pam Shriver said it best. These guys can manage their workload. Like, I think Novak is the best at it by a mile, obviously.
Yeah.
Like this man knows what he's doing in terms of conserving. So yeah, Novak's a great pick. I'm picking Sinner for banter. What a man. If I had told you at the beginning of the year, I got to listen back to the Australian Open episode we did when Sinner won and be like, this is the greatest day in the history of the world.
Someone please clip together from our episodes every time we've mentioned. He's looking a bit bigger at the moment, isn't he? It's like how much he's grown in stature. Crazy.
Someone's eating their carrots.
Exactly.
The Carrot Boys should be arrested too, right? No, I'm joking. I'm joking. The Garada Boys. I'm joking. Innocent. He's innocent. Clear to play. Good stuff. Anything else you got, Simon? Anything else?
I don't think so. I think this has been a dreadful week for tennis. Really, really awful.
It's bad. It's bad. Let's go into 2 challenges remaining. I feel like yours might be soccer related. I'm curious though. What is it?
It's not, no. It's still sports related. And I think it's actually a previous challenge that you've put in here. And I finally sat down and watched Sprint at your recommendation.
Yeah.
And
yes.
I really, really enjoyed it. I really liked it. I think you mentioned to me coming out of it, I think you mentioned that Noah Lyles comes across really well in it. I think he does as well. I think he's a very sympathetic and empathetic character. I think his backstory, his mother, like his whole family, he seems like depending on how you view some of these athletes, he seems relatively okay to me. It seems like I found a level of kinship with him that I didn't think I was going to find. It's really good. It's a nice behind the scenes look at a discipline which is so revered but oftentimes undercovered throughout the history of sprinting. People tend to look at it as like these gladiatorial situations where it's almost mythical of how these people train, and then you see it and you're just like, oh, like they get up and do the same things
on a track.
Fairly unsurprising. Yeah. It's fairly normal to me, but I think it's a great documentary series and really, really do encourage people to watch it.
Oh, definitely agree. Man, I'm missing random Olympic events. Can I just stream fencing randomly on a Wednesday morning? Is that illegal? Is it against the rules, man?
It's fine.
Great stuff. I'm gonna go. I'm blanking. I had something else, but I cannot remember it for the life of me. But I installed a basket on my bike the other day with the help of my partner, and I gotta say, the back pain I'm avoiding now has been huge. I wish I had been doing this the whole time.
Wait,
baskets.
So
they're great.
What's the implication here? So you put a basket on and then put your bag into the basket. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
As opposed to wearing the bag, and then of course the bag creating a layer of back sweat that is just now something that you have to be with at work. It's not good.
Have you ridden an e-bike yet? Are you still on the acoustic one?
I have, yeah. They're great.
Do you like it?
I do, yeah. And my partner has one as well, and it's awesome. I would, yeah. If the next bike I get, I guess, knock on wood. My current bike I got a couple summers ago, and it's still going good. But the e-bikes are good. I do miss I do like the idea of pedaling on my own all the time. But I get commuting wise, e-bikes are great.
I think they're fantastic. Really are the future, and I think we should be leaning into them more because they're so cheap comparatively for what you get out of them long term.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're great. Basket's also great, Deb. Good pick.
Thank you. All right, we'll leave it there. Reminder, we are on patreon.com/open era. Join us there. Get the pod ad free. Get it early on Sundays or whenever we record, which is now midweek. Plus, join the Discord where we're chatting tennis and Sinner conspiracy theories all the time. It's been extra spicy in there. So join us, patreon.com/open era pod. And that's it for producer Dylan on the ones and twos, and for Simon. Thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next week.